me get this going here. Hey everybody, it's Outdoors. Welcome to Unknown Files. I'm getting everything ready. I'm late. We were talking. Alrighty. Alright, come on, big boy. Oh, hang on. I'm getting there. There we go. We're on the air. All right, good evening. Welcome to this edition of the Unknown Files show, brought to you in part by our good friends at Revelton Distillery down in Osceola, Iowa. We're going to be talking about the big fella tonight. We got a very special guest, Dr. Russ Jones, on, and this is going to be a fun hour. Thanks to everybody that's listened to us on the Outdoor Call Radio Network. Appreciate you tuning in, and thanks to everybody that's watching us on Facebook. We got a couple people on there already. So sorry about being late tonight. Russ and I were talking, and I looked up and I said, "Oh my gosh, I got to hit play." Good evening, Russ.
How are you, my friend? It's good to see you.
I'm good, Doctor Russ Jones. What's Doctor Russ Jones up to?
Let's see. I live in West Virginia most of the time. I have a farm in Southeast Ohio as well that I spend some time there. But this week I'm in West Virginia. It's 50 today. We had yesterday. I was in the woods after I saw patients. 5 inches of snow. 5 miles later, tripping a couple times. A little beat up today.
You're way more active than I am. I brought the garbage in.
Hey, you got to live the life, man. If I'm gonna complain to patients all day about you got to lose weight, then I got to live that life.
Well, see, shed hunting's coming up here pretty quick, and you know you're an outdoors guy, so you like to hunt and fish, and
yeah.
We'll start. I already got cameras of deer dropping their horns or antlers, so here in a couple more weeks, Raven and I, that's my black lab, we'll get out there and start covering some ground and find some sheds. Hank, what's going on down there in Osceola? Thank you for watching tonight. Appreciate you. So, well, I got to tell you, I'm looking forward to this. Our buddy Tim introduced us, and Tim said he had a conflict. He goes, "Hey, can you have Dr. Russ on?" And I said, "Well, I'd love to have Dr. Russ on." And I went and listened to, please forgive me, Tim's wife's. What's Tim's wife's
Dana.
name? Dana, I am so sorry. I listened to their podcast with you, and I thoroughly enjoyed that, Russ. You did a good job.
Thanks.
How did you get into the Bigfoot phenomenon?
You know, it's interesting because I think now I'm 58, and I think, is that the thing that you're going to do? Like when you're 58 years old, you're going to look back and you're going to be well known for Bigfoot. I mean, who grows up thinking that, right? I mean, it's not something you anticipate, but I grew up in one of those families like is legitimately an outdoors family. Everybody in my family hunted. My great grandfather was in the Columbus Dispatch, a picture of him shooting squirrels with a pistol out of a tree. And, people came from all over to try to buy our rabbit dogs and our coon dogs. We all ginseng hunted. People would drive great distances to see how many deer we had hanging the first day of deer season. So I always was an outdoorsman. And when I was a teenager, we'd got New Year's Eve, we'd gotten about 5 inches of snow. New Year's Day was beautiful and sunny, but really cold. And I was rabbit hunting. I took a guy from the Army out to see me run our dogs and came along a hillside. And there was a cave up above me. This was in Ohio. And I found barefooted human footprints. At that point, I didn't know anything about Bigfoot, never even heard of it, didn't know anything about it. I thought that it was like some hippie had found this remote cave and was living there because it was the 70s. And I walked up and looked inside, and there was no clothes, there was no fire, and the tracks were very crystal clear. I could see literally just looked like a man was walking barefoot. It was a normal human size. It wasn't large. And later that year, I was fishing in this remote beaver dam that my family had discovered when we were coon hunting. No one knew it was there. It was back in this wilderness area, about a mile back in the woods. And I was fishing on the dam with my uncle. And, we're not talking. We're both quietly standing fairly close. We both have pistols because it was very snaky back there. And I heard something walking through the brush on the other side of the beaver dam from me. It's maybe, I don't know, 35, 40 yards thick over there. And I glanced and saw my uncle was looking too. I thought it was probably just a deer coming down. And then it started screaming very monkey like and shaking trees, which later I would come to find out is a very Bigfoot type behavior. I asked my uncle, what is that? And he's like, just look for a tree you can climb. And it went on for about a minute and then it just quit. But like all outdoorsmen, we just kept fishing
Yeah.
because, we're not afraid of the woods. We're not afraid of anything that's out there. We didn't know what it was, but we weren't afraid. And later that year, Leonard Nimoy had the In Search of show on, and one episode was In Search of Bigfoot. It made me suspicious. I followed it my entire life. I went to undergrad in Indiana for 4 years and got that degree. Went to doctor school in Iowa, got my doctor degree. And as I entered practice, I would still read the few Bigfoot books that would come out that time. Years later, I saw that Dr. Jeff Meldrum, which is an anthropologist, was speaking a couple hours from my house. And I thought, I'm just going to go up there and listen to him talk. I didn't know anybody. I wasn't involved in Bigfoot. Listened to him, talked to him a little bit afterwards. And then I went on an expedition with the BFRO, which is the only scientific group doing research at that point, and met Matt Moneymaker from the TV show Finding Bigfoot. And Matt and I hit it off and have been good friends since then. That was about 15 years ago. And, I've written a couple books. I've spoke about everywhere, done a lot of documentaries, a couple hundred podcasts, have my own podcast. And now it's Bigfoot.
Yeah.
I'm in the woods a couple times a week, year round, like I was yesterday, like I will be tomorrow, like I will be this weekend. And, I have 40 something game cameras out there. So I'm just chasing them all the time.
Well, similar background, both outdoors guys, and I never, you've had more activity or seen more than I have, but I haven't seen anything, to be honest with you. But I just, Leonard Nimoy, I started reading all the books when I was in elementary and junior high. Albert Alsman, I read the story
Yeah.
of Albert Alsman when he was taken by a family of Sasquatch back in the
Yes.
1800s, and that and Ape Canyon. I mean,
Yes.
all those stories just fascinated me. We had in the '70s, we had Bigfoot activity, or a lot of on mainstream news. They called it Momo the Monster in,
Yeah.
in Missouri. Then there was the
Yes.
Jerseyville Mud Monster in Illinois across the river. So I mean, I grew up with some of the stuff. It's fascinating, Russ, and just and since I started doing this show 2 years ago. Hey, Cheryl, how's it going? Tony, how you doing? Good to see you. Thank you very much. Aaron, how's it going, buddy? Do they consider Bigfoot part of the Indian legends? Aaron, actually, that's a good question because, and Russ, you can chime in on this, but they go the Indian lore or the Indian. Every Native American tribe, from my understanding, has a name for Bigfoot, and it's not
Yeah.
Bigfoot. Everyone has a different dialect name. But I mean, it goes back several hundred years.
Yeah. Hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Like where I am in Appalachia, we had 5 Indian tribes. 2 of the 5 had names for Bigfoot,
Mm.
but there's several hundred different names across the nation for, Bigfoot that come from the Indians. And I think that's one of the arguments that people make for the legitimacy of Bigfoot is that the Indians address Bigfoot much like they would any other animal.
Yeah.
Except for in the Pacific Northwest, some of the tribes believed that they were a people.
Yeah.
And
The woods people.
yeah, they sometimes said that they traded with them,
Yeah.
centuries ago or whatever it happens to be.
I met a gentleman up in Minnesota, and I don't know if I told you this when we talked a few months ago or not, but I was up in Minnesota where I go walleye fishing all the time. And there's a gentleman up there that was on Matt Moneymaker's TV show. What the name of Finding
Finding
Bigfoot?
Bigfoot.
Yeah, they actually came up there, and I mean, his whole family room he's a Native American. He's an elder,
Mm-hmm.
and his whole family room is nothing but Bigfoot castings, where he goes
Mm-hmm.
and everyone is differently shaped.
Right.
And they got abnormalities, dermal ridges. I mean,
Yeah.
it's crazy. And Matt Moneymaker came up there and interviewed him. It's a great story.
Yeah. How that goes is there's people like me across the country. I think there's probably less than 100 of us that there's thousands and thousands that are interested in Bigfoot and kind of go out and camp for the weekends and do different things. But in terms of people doing legitimate research all the time, there's probably less than 100 of us. And so whenever a TV show like Expedition Bigfoot or Finding Bigfoot or whatever it happens to be, they know who those people are and they reach out to them when they're going to be in that area and ask them for their witnesses. And that's how those people get to the show. And like anytime that Finding Bigfoot was in Ohio, West Virginia, largely it was my witnesses that were interviewed on the show.
Yeah, Brad said there's too many stories of something like Bigfoot out there not to be something there, or at least back in the day. Interesting stuff. Thank you, Brad. I appreciate that. Thank you for watching tonight. Um, Dr. Russ, it's to me. I mean, you got a background in science. I was a. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm your neighborhood bow hunter. So, but I can look at topography and I can find bedding areas, food sources, travel corridors, pinch points, water areas. I mean, I know what to look for if I'm going for a bear like the one behind me, or if I'm going for an elk or a deer or turkey or whatever. You got something out there that's several hundred pounds, 7, 8 feet tall,
Yeah.
and you stumble on it by accident. You don't go out and just find it. Nobody.
Yeah.
I can't remember who the two naturalists were. There was a high school biology teacher and a naturalist that lived in the Pacific Northwest, and they had an acronym, an algorithm or whatever you want to call it.
Hukin and Sullivan.
That's it. They figured you had to have 200 hours to habitualize an animal for you. They would have comfortable having contact with you.
Yeah, they had an encounter and got interested, and so they kept meticulous notes. And then, of course, back then they had cameras, and they were carrying their cameras around, all the time.
Right.
And that's what they found in their notes. I found 200 hours to be, for a long time, I thought it was a really accurate number. And when I wrote the first book, I said that I thought that that was a good number. But then the more time I do it, I find that now about half of that is a good number.
But
As I become more experienced.
you still haven't found him.
No, no. I mean, here's what I know you like to hunt deer, so here's a good analogy. A lot of times I use with Bigfoot. Of course, Bigfoot's rare, so there is 100 bears an estimate for every Bigfoot, right? So we don't see bears a lot either, unless you're baiting them or something. And in nature, when we're hunting, it's rare. Even in West Virginia, where there's a lot of them, I'll see 4 or 5 a year, and they're usually running from me. Or I'll see where they were laying, and there's a bunch of flies laying there, and they're gone. But Bigfoot, in my mind, it stays back in the most remote area, like a big buck. A big buck stays back where it doesn't think that people are going to be. It's in the thickest stuff, and then it waits till about dark and starts creeping forward a little bit. And I think the Bigfoot does the same thing, except for it's much more rare than a trophy buck. You
Well, no,
know,
I think that's a good analogy because that's true. You get a 4, 5, 6 year old buck. I mean, they strictly stay nocturnal until you get into the rut phase.
yeah,
They'll daylight in bachelor groups and early, but as soon as they sense any pressure,
yeah,
but here, and again, I'm way more open minded about this than I ever have been in my life. I mean, I love the topic, I just and I get people every week emailing me. Well, why aren't we finding them on satellite telemetry? And well, how do you know we're not? I mean,
yeah,
I don't have access to government satellites, so
right,
I don't know what they're seeing. I've heard several different interviews where military personnel have said that they've been out on doing
yeah,
tactical, and they've seen them. They've seen them on
yes,
their FLIRs. They've seen them on their thermals. The
yes,
helicopter pilots have seen them on their FLIRs. But that's
yes.
all. It's all classified.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear those stories, of course, all the time. And there's even some universities that are doing studies, telemetry studies for the government. And, you know, they have told some of my friends that they legitimately see um, Bigfoot as well, but I mean, I think that technology is improving. DNA testing is becoming more readily available. There's new, like people are using eDNA now. There's different things out there. A lot of us are using thermal drones now. Of course, you can't really have a cover, but I think that it's just a matter of time before something kind of breaks.
Yeah, Arlie says, "Oh, I got to get into the Bigfoot. They are hiding in runnels." that's a town here in southeast of Des Moines. Uh,
Okay.
yeah, there you go, Arlie. Rick, good evening. Good to see you. Nick, thank you. Nick says he loves it. Good stuff, fellas. Roger Wild is in New York. Hi, Bigfoot. Hi, Roger. With Bigfoot and Skinwalkers being the same family, I don't think that's. Skinwalkers are something that can transition into different things, allegedly. That's
Yeah.
more of that's a different kind of cryptid. That's not a thing. Let me and again, I'm just you I want to see one and I want to hear one. Okay.
Okay.
So I've talked to so many people now, and I think Dr. Jeff Meldrum is amazing.
Yeah.
Going back to the castings and everything in the 50s and 60s. I mean,
Yeah.
Russ, you could not. They didn't have 3D printers and stuff back then for you to do
Yeah.
the dermal ridges or the with the bone structures.
Yes.
Nobody was going to know how to fake all those, and who in the
Yeah.
heck is going to be out there 50 miles in the wilderness putting those down to fake anyway?
Yeah.
I don't see that. But
Yeah.
but with everything going on today, first of all, I think if they're as intelligent as I think they are, I said this the other day. I think they're really smart because I wouldn't want to be around us either.
Well, think about this. So, and I know you and I talked about this, but I guess for the people listening, it goes something like this. So, there was nothing in the United States 10 to 20,000 years ago. There were no animals, there were no people, there were no indigenous people. The ice froze, in the Bering Land Bridge between
Yeah,
Russia, Asia, and the United States. Everything and all animals came across, and that's how they got here. So
right.
whatever Bigfoot would be came across as well. And there's some candidates, you and I had talked about that, but the reality is that whatever Bigfoot is, just like Neanderthal, Homo, they all lived together, they all saw each other, and the Bigfoot watched humans, homos kill things.
Homo
And so,
erectus. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and so not Homo erectus, but even Homo erectus, but the new modern Homo human. Um, so they became leery of us generationally ago. So they're curious about us, but we had larger brains. We were killing everything. We were hunting everything, and so things like that got where they just avoided humans in general.
Well, even back in the 1800s, though, there's been documentation of people, when they were first settling the states out west, that they had encounters and they documented them. I mean, I've,
Yeah,
s- I mean, there's been Tobe and Brett's documentary Flash of Beauty. There was a gentleman that was from the east. He was Russ. I don't think he was a Mormon, but he was there. He was there. He was a church. He was a clerk
yeah,
person, and he wrote back saying that there was these giants that I'm trying to get him to take me in, but nobody. They wouldn't take him in to show him where the giants were. But he
yeah,
sent that back to the colleges where he came to to indoctrinate Christian religion.
yeah.
And I mean, and they got the documentation on that. There even back in the 1800s, there's literally a lot of sightings or reportings or people saw things.
Right. I mean, Daniel Boone, right? David
Yeah,
Crockett.
yeah,
Daniel Boone reportedly shot one, and it was his deathbed confession that he regretted. He called it a yahoo, but during pioneer time, the pioneers were Gulliver's Travels was a really popular book, and they
hmm
had a creature that was ape-like in it that was called a yahoo. So all through Appalachia, here in central West Virginia, that's where Daniel Boone originally settled. And we have Yahoo Creek, Yahoo this, Yahoo that. And Kentucky's the same way. Even part of the national park system over there, Yahoo Falls exists not far from me in Kentucky
So when you guys go out and you find footprints or tracks, you said you run game cameras all the time.
all
I
the
mean,
time.
how
40
many times?
something.
You know what's fake and what's not fake. I mean, what have you gotten on trail cameras that you're comfortable saying? I don't think that's fake.
So here's what I can tell you about what I believe with game cameras is there's a lot of studies out. There was one here about 5 years ago. There was one in China because the Chinese have these enormous rainforests and they believe they have undocumented species over there. Of course, they have a Bigfoot creature over there. It's called the Yeren. And so the Chinese people tested all of our game cameras. The one that they liked the best was one called Reconyx, which is very popular here in the United States, but it's very expensive. So people are using cheaper ones. And so game cameras are about 30 decibels is what a average game camera is. That's why even if you're using ones that don't flash like mine, you still see the animals looking at them, and they're looking at them because they hear the camera proceed to fire up and make that noise.
What are they seeing the EM? Are they picking up the EMF from the infrared?
No, because the way game cameras work is they have a PIR sensor, a passive sensor. So the game camera is sitting there. A lot of people think that this infrared triggers like sitting out there, and when something walks through it, it fires. But that's not how game cameras work. They sit there passively measuring the temperature that's coming into them. And then whenever the temperature changes, it fires.
Oh,
So the only way that a Bigfoot or an animal could see the infrared is if another animal went through and it saw it flash. Then, if it could see infrared, it might know that something was there. But it's interesting. University of Georgia did a study that it was very hard to get alpha male coyotes on game cameras. They were leery of them. They were hearing them. They were. So here's what I believe about game cameras. I mean, I have looked at hundreds of thousands of pictures because I do it myself all the time in some of the most remote places in all of Eastern North America. And I would love to get a picture. I have a couple that I was like, there might be something, there might not be something. But how I use it is this: I will see the same deer on my camera, the same coyotes repetitiously. My cameras are in place for a year. With lithium batteries, I can get about a year of them. If I'm in a place where there's not a bunch of deer running through, I may get a year and a half. And so you'll have times that all of a sudden all the deer in your area will disappear. You'll see be about 5 days, maybe a week. You won't see anything.
yeah, they
So
change.
something's disrupting your animals.
Well,
Something's in that area.
and they change food sources too.
Well, I mean, usually with like in Appalachia,
Are they
it's
on?
not like that. It's mountainous, it's woods. We don't really have a lot of fields, but even in Ohio where I have, a park adjoining my farm and I have soybean fields, like generally if you have a camera out a length of time, you'll see the same deer, the same does. I mean, the does have what is their home range? Like
Well, it just depends.
20 acres, 18 acres.
Yeah,
Not very much.
yeah. Bucks will hang around an area where they were a dropped or a fawn, and then they'll range out a few miles and several miles during the rut cycle, but they try to
Yeah.
stay in that home range. So, but you're right. If you're in an area that's got a lot of ridges and hard timber or hardwoods, they're going to be eating acorns and mass crops and browse. So
Yeah.
if you don't have the field crops, then they probably are staying around. Yeah.
Yeah. Largely the does are staying in that. When the bucks go into rut, they'll be on about 4,000 acres. So that's why a lot of times people will see bucks show up that they just hadn't seen before. And I mean, you know a lot more about that than me, but I can tell you that because I look at so many GAM cam pictures and do it all the time, you get to know the areas that are in there. You'll see the same bobcat. It'll come around every 17 days. You'll see the same coyotes come through all the time. And animals are very repetitious in their home range, and that's what they do. But sometimes you'll find that something is disrupting your animals and something's in there. Like for instance, there's one place in Ohio's most remote park. Because I'm a master naturalist, I'll go in, offer to help the rangers. I was like, do you want to know how the residents that join your park are affecting your deer population? Do you want to know how many coyotes you have or how many bobcats? There's formulas for these things. So I move cameras in, and later I'll write them a report. But as they get to know me, then I'll talk about, hey, I do Bigfoot stuff, and this is my name. Here's my book. You can have this book. And, we get talking. And then as I develop a relationship, I'll say, hey, if you were going to be in the woods here, where is the most remote place, the hardest place to get to? Have you ever heard anything? And invariably, they will send you someplace. And, I went into this place in Ohio, and it was a gravel road that dead ended. It was about 4 miles long. There was snow on the ground. Nobody had been there for a couple of weeks because the snow had not been broken. And so I'm walking up a hollow. There is no path. And I'm looking that on both sides of the holler from me, it's been clear cut. And I can tell that it's about 10 to 12 years old based on the trees that I'm seeing. And I'm seeing that the deer are crossing back and forth while I get up to the head of the hollow. And all at once, I notice I'm just not seeing the deer traffic that I was earlier. It makes me suspicious. So I'm carrying a couple of my cameras with locks around my neck. I pull one off, I'm putting it on a tree, and I hear a wood knock, which is a sound that Bigfoot apparently makes.
Right.
No one's sure whether it's hitting a tree, whether it's a mouth pop like some of the orangutans or mountain gorillas do, or if it's a hand clap because their hands on an adult maybe twice ours. And I heard it was not far from me, maybe 80 yards. It was loud enough. Like you, I have a black lab that's with me all the time in the woods named Shade. And Shade looked, and I said, "That's where we're going, bub." So we started up that hollow, and I got to a point where two more other little hollows came down. I thought, if I can just get a camera up here, I can drop one and nobody will see me. I was putting that camera up real quick, and another one of those loud claps or wood knocks was, I mean, it was just right where I couldn't see, and it was close to me. And, and it was getting close to dark. And so, I'm taking all these notes down. It was February 3rd. So next year when I came in there, I went in there with 7 cameras and dropped them before deer season. So they were in there or in place, assuming that maybe they'd be in that same area that time of the year. But what I found was I didn't get pictures of anything. I got 3 cameras that I had deer all the time, same deer, but during that 1 week, nothing on my cameras.
Yeah, that's crazy. We
Yeah,
got
so
we
something's
got.
there.
Oh, absolutely. Brad says, I never knew about the deathbed confession. Why in the heck would someone make a deathbed confession and lie? That's crazy. That's a good point. That's a good point. Aaron says, where can we get copies of your book, Dr. Russ?
So I have a website. It's called thebigfootdoc.com. And I have 2 books. The first one I did was called Tracking the Stone Man, and it did well, and it won some awards. And then the next book I wrote was during COVID, and it was called The Appalachian Bigfoot. It was #1 on Amazon for 17 weeks. It's still a huge seller. It is now on Audible Books. Not me reading it because they probably didn't want my hillbilly accent. But it's available out there too. And then after that one was so successful, I went back and did a second edition of the first book. And so it took me 253 hours just to do my second edition. So usually I update the information. The Appalachian Bigfoot, I think people appreciated because, I talked about it like a hunter. Like when I go into the woods, I talked about bird language, that what the birds are like, and the birds are alarming, and how many birds there are in a typical area, and things that hunters we just don't think about because it's so often for us that we just, you know, how it is. We go in a place, we sit down, we try to let the woods settle down for a while. And it takes about 15 minutes or so. And then everything kind of settles down and we're okay. But, these birds are living in an area about the size of a football field, except for like bigger ones like blue jays, maybe a couple football fields. So as we're moving through the woods, these animals are listening to those birds. And there's science out now that the bobcats, the deer are actually recognizing specific birds. So
Well,
they
not,
may be trying to get upwind of you, but then they're also listening to the bird and can tell what it is.
it's not just birds too. When squirrels start barking and chattering,
Yes.
deer pay attention to that. I've got that on video when I'm filming the TV show. I don't know how many times where they'll start barking, a coyote or something will be coming in, and them deer's heads will start popping up, and they'll start triangulating with their ears, and they'll go look and see, because deer are very curious animals.
Yes.
So that there's a lot of validity to that. Brad said his wife's family swears of a sighting in the 80s in northern New Hampshire. Nash Stream Forest, very low population and super remote. Arlie says, Jason Armstrong, you need to listen to this. Thank you, guys. I appreciate the comments tonight.
Yeah, of course, we have sightings in every state in the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, even a place like Iowa, there's a very good friend of mine named Ontario Richardson that lives near Cedar Rapids.
Yeah,
And she does Bigfoot stuff there.
I think we've had 9 sightings. Is it 9?
Well, the thing is, keep in mind, like, here, how you look at it depends on the person. Like, I've interviewed over 1,000 witnesses, but if you look in West Virginia, like our group will probably say there may be 60 reports or something like that. But it largely depends on who's in the state, who's active, and a lot of the things we're just not putting in the public. So, like the BFRO may have over 1,000 reports across the country that somebody went and interviewed somebody. We did a report and the public can look at it, but we have over 80,000 that are there. And that's one of the things that you and I were talking about earlier is, I think the great majority of these reports are misidentifications. People are seeing bears, they're just catching a glimpse of something. Maybe it's a hunter in a ghillie suit. Who knows what it is? And I think the great majority of them are wrong. And I found that a lot of the reports start with something like, I've been in the woods my whole life. I heard the sound. I've never heard it before. But the reality is, most people aren't in the woods at dark and they don't know the sounds that animals make. And but if you are willing to throw away from those 80,000 reports, and we're estimating that one of maybe 20 Bigfoot interactions gets recorded somewhere. So, you're talking about a 500,000, something like that, but throw them all away and just keep the best 500. And these are clear daytime sightings by park rangers, clear daytime sightings by hunters that are medical doctors that run medical schools. Just keep the very best reports. And that's what I do in my book. Like every year you get, a couple of your best reports. So, for instance, last year, I get this guy, he's in southern West Virginia, and it's very steep and mountainous in southern West Virginia. If you come through as a visitor, you're like, how do those trees even hold on those hills? It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
But this guy is smart. He's a psychologist. So, he has a couple degrees and he's killed 5 bears. And, a lot of people here would dig ten or $15,000 worth of ginseng. This guy's dug that in a weekend, 5 different times. And how he does that is he looks at maps and he finds places that four-wheelers and side-by-sides can't get to, that it's a 3 or 4 hour walk into a wilderness area. And that's how he finds that, all that ginseng. And so when he's doing that, he's in remote places. This guy did it his whole life, never had a Bigfoot encounter, never heard anything. Well, he had one. And so, when you get a witness that's bright, he's a woodsman, he does it all the time. No one can convince me that the dude that's killed 5 bears already and hunts his whole life doesn't know what he's looking at. He told me that he started over this hill into this holler that was a real deep, dark hollow. And of course, that's where you'd probably find some ginseng. But he said, when I started over that hill, he had his 13-year-old stepson with him. He said, we walked 3.5 hours to get to this place. And he said, I thought somebody laughed at me. He said, that was the sound I heard. But he's like, I just looked around. I couldn't see anybody. I thought, there's no way anybody's back here. And then when he got over the hill a little bit further, then he heard that sound again and he looked up and then he saw the Bigfoot. It was about 100 yards from him and it was standing behind some smaller trees. And it started swaying the trees back and forth and then snapping him. And he watched it do that for a few minutes and then it walked up a hill. And, he was carrying a pistol. He told his stepson, who was very fearful, he said, I want to go down there and look at those trees and just see what I can see. And they walked down there. And when they got down there, then a rock came rolling down the hill and he looked up on top of the hill above him and he could see it sitting beside a stump and it was rolling rocks down. Then he told his stepson, we're going to walk out of here the same way we came.
Yeah.
Let's go. And so this guy, I mean, he was tore up and he would text me all the time and be like, I've been looking at my maps and there's this perfect place and here it is. And I would tell him, man, these things are rare. There's much more great space for Bigfoot across the country than there is actual animals. Because sometimes people will say, well, how many do you think there is? And I'm like, well, it's a species, right? So you have babies, you have little ones, you have adults, you have old ones. So, estimates in North America, all of Canada, all the United States, a good number might be 4,000 to 20,000. But then when you start dividing it by states and by counties, you start looking at like a very mountainous, rugged, rural state like West Virginia, maybe 125 to 150 animals. So you're talking about a family group in a county. So a very rugged county that's like 30 miles by 30 miles with steep hollows and steep hills and no roads and no nothing, that somewhere in there is an animal that's been there for generations. It knows where people go. It knows where the hunters go. It knows where people don't go. And
Food
so when
source.
we get, yeah, that's right. It's chasing the food sources. I
Yeah.
call it treat foods. Like it's not helpful for someone to say Bigfoot eats deer. Well, we know he eats deer, right? I mean, because that's the only way they could get through the winter. They'd have to eat deer. But they're chasing the sources that they wouldn't see the whole rest of the year. So if they can get a deer, sure, they're going to get a deer. But when are the berries ripe? Where is there a berry patch that's remote that you can find that a four-wheeler can't get to? Where is the south-facing hillsides where there's maybe some rocks or something where it can get sun, because it would be a cold-blooded animal in the winter and it'd want a little more of that sun. And so maybe in the summer you're thinking about a north-facing hillside that has a spring or a seep on it. And so, you're putting all these factors into play to see, if you can come up with something.
Yeah. Harley says the coolest thing about Bigfoot is there's nobody saying there's any attacks from them. Just proves they are harmless. Aaron said, have you ever thought about looking for Bigfoot around Indian burial grounds?
Yeah. It's interesting because, to go on the Indian properties, you have to have permission. But, the Indians have no doubt. They just believe completely that Bigfoot's real and it's, just another creature. I think the reality is what's going to happen is 3 times I've interviewed hunters that had a clear shot at one and could have shot it. But the story reminds me of in the 70s and the 80s in Ohio, we had very few coyotes. I mean, you never even saw them ever. And I remember my brother-in-law, we were deer hunting and we were doing a deer drive through this clear cut. And he told me, he's like, I saw a coyote. And I'm like, why didn't you shoot it? And he's like, I thought it was a dog at first and it was gone. So, no one's going into the woods thinking they're going to bump into Bigfoot. It catches people off guard. It looks a little human. And all the people say that and they just pause and hesitate. But someone's going to get one. And then instead of having people like me that are working each week and seeing patients and trying to fit it in when you can fit it in, and you have your personal life and your work life and your family life and all this stuff, we're going to have scientists that are going to come out from the universities, not the ones that are sitting behind their desk and don't ever go into the field, but legitimate field biologists. The government's going to let them go into places we're not allowed to go, and they're going to pay them to be there for a while, and they're going to have good equipment.
Yeah. Hold that thought, Dr. Russ. I'm going to take a real quick break. We're listening to the Unknown Files. Dr. Russ Jones is with me tonight. Hang on, and we'll be right back after these few words from our sponsors. You're heading out on your morning hunt well before sunrise, so you can stay undetected from that giant you've been chasing all season. Wouldn't it be nice to know exactly where your stand or blind location is without letting anyone know where you're at walking in? Have you ever heard of Onyx? Onyx is one of the most important pieces of hunting gear that you can use and always have with you. The Onyx Hunt app allows you not only to get from your truck to your hunting spots, it also allows you to mark and save your parking spots, scrapes, food plots, rub lines, or some possible next stand locations. The Onyx Hunt app is also a great way to see your property and know where you stand. Onyx is a mobile app that you can take anywhere. It's recognized by game wardens all around the country as a valuable hunting tool. So, if you want to always know where you are and have the ability to save information that will help you be a better hunter, go download the Onyx Hunt app at your app store today.
You're ready for your next outdoor adventure. Wouldn't it be nice to have high-definition footage as a fun memory of your time in the outdoors? Well, Tacticam has been helping hunters do that very thing. Whether it's one of our 5.0 or the 5.0 wide camera, you're going to capture your hunts like never before. They can help you cover your bow fishing trips with the new Tacticam Fish Cam that's totally waterproof and ready to record some awesome bow fishing action. All the Tacticam cameras feature 4K resolution, Wi-Fi compatible, feature live stream capabilities, with over 2.5 hours of record time that feature image stabilization that's far above other cameras in its class. The Tacticam remote lets you hook up multiple cameras to one remote to capture more angles and shots like never before. So when you're ready to record your next hunting or fishing adventure, don't forget to take your Tacticam camera. You'll be able to relive your trips like never before. Tacticam.com for more info.
Let's talk about a story, an Iowa story about a dream that took several years to come true in Osceola, Iowa. It's the story of Revelton Distilling Company. These fine distilled whiskeys, gins, and vodkas were born from the labor of Rob and Christina Taylor. It's amazing hearing the customers' descriptions of how unique each bottle looks and how each spirit tastes and satisfies with every sip. From the honey whiskey to the whiskey and cream, or the robust mulberry gin, American gin, or vodkas. Revelton Distilling visitors can't believe the flavor profiles the mixologists are creating at the distillery every day. Revelton Distillery is open Wednesday through Sunday in Osceola. They're located at 1400 West Clay Street, right off I-35. Revelton Distillery fine spirits are also available at your local grocery and other retailers around Iowa. Please check them out online at reveltondistillery.com or visit them at the distillery. If it's time to celebrate or just time to sit back and unwind, well, then it's time for a Revelton moment.
You're hunting and a deer tick just crawled onto your leg and is burying its head into your flesh. You can't feel the bite, and you may or may not find the tick. In the coming weeks, you may or may not notice a red ring around the bite. Shortly thereafter, you may or may not get really sick. Your doctor may or may not test you for Lyme disease. The test may or may not detect it, meaning you may or may not get the medication needed. If untreated or not treated on time, you could have a lifetime of complications. Don't take that chance. Get Elimitic clothing from Game Hide. Elimitic features Insect Shield, a repellent that is fused to the fabric fibers. Ticks hate it. Elimitic clothing will retain its effectiveness for the life of the garment and needs no special care. The treatment is odorless and invisible. Wearing Elimitic can help protect you from ticks, chiggers, and other biting insects, and is featured in a complete line of quality Game Hide hunting clothing. To learn more, visit GameHide.com.
All right, welcome back to Unknown Files. Number Dr. Russ Jones. We're talking about the big fella tonight. Russ, thanks for that. I kind of went long. I was supposed to take a break before then, but I didn't want to interrupt the conversation. This is awesome. Arlie says, I bet they live in a cave-style home. They were strong enough to move huge rocks to cover the entrance of the cave. And Arlie would like to know, what's the name of your book again, please?
Okay. Once again, you can go on the Bigfoot doc and find my books on there. It'll give you a link to my podcast. I do a podcast, part of the Untold Radio Network, where I interview witnesses each week and do that type of thing. But going back to what you were talking about with the caves, we haven't found any evidence that they live in caves. You know, I think that they may visit old mines. We have over 10,000 here in West Virginia that are, not claimed. They're not closed. They're still open. Structures and farm country, abandoned houses and corn cribs and sheds and things like that. I think they may go in inclement weather, but we haven't found any evidence that they're staying in these type of places.
Well, bears den in pretty shallow areas. I mean, a bear den is not like a cave. And mountain lions will den up when they have young. So what's to say that they're not using those as, to get out of the weather and stuff if they want to den up?
What about deer and coyotes? I don't think the animals just think about the weather like we do. I always used to think about, for instance, there was a Bigfoot sighting in the highlands of West Virginia, very cold. There's ski resorts. They get a couple inches of snow there. And this hunter he went out, it was New Year's Day. He wanted to fill his doe tag. So he drove out in the middle of nowhere. He's walking into this wilderness area and he's crunching on this road that, that's gated off. There's so much ice. And he's like, everything can hear me. So he's like, I'm just going to find a place and sit down. So he sits down and he keeps hearing something down below him in this marshy, swampy area. And he can't see anything. He keeps looking through his scope, hears it again. He looks down and he said, I'm looking right at this animal's face. It looks apish. It's staring right at me. He said, as soon as I looked at it, it just started that walk. And it walked, kind of away from at an angle. And it was interesting because, the mountains in West Virginia are dropping steeply. So this animal could have, in just a couple hours, dropped off that mountain, been a couple thousand feet lower, 10 degrees warmer. But it was up there. It wasn't paying attention to things like, we're like, it's cold, I'm going to die out here. But I'm not sure a lot of the animals are like that. The bobcats, the coyotes, they may be in pine groves or something like that. And maybe Bigfoot uses pine groves as well, where it's about 10 degrees warmer than it is outside. I mean, who's to say? But they certainly, they're large animals as adults. They have to have calories, so they're going to be out moving around some for sure.
Rick wants to know what's the thoughts about being interdimensional.
Yeah. So about, let's say until about 5 years ago, we did not have any of this. We call it woo.
Woo, yeah, the woo
You
theory.
like the go, yeah,
Yeah.
kind of like a ghost woo. And woo is anytime that you attach a paranormal belief onto something. I haven't seen any evidence that Bigfoot is just not a normal and ordinary animal that is rare, that people don't encounter very often, that would be probably our closest relative and therefore would be intelligent. But there was one man, a good friend of mine named Tom Powell, that wrote a couple of books. It's from out west. And he was in the same group as me. And he was interested in the wooish reports that had some type of paranormal activity or whatever it happened to be. And so, for whatever reason, in the last 5 years, we've seen this expanding belief in people that Bigfoot is interdimensional, Bigfoot can disappear, Bigfoot goes into
Phase in.
portals,
Yeah.
and all these things. But here's what I believe. I believe that we never before in our history have ever had so few people that are woodsmen. They're never in the woods. They don't hunt. They don't know the trees. They know very little about the woods. So now they go out, they find some trees that are twisted away or they're broken or they're held up against each other. And they're saying this is Bigfoot activity. And so I had somebody on that wrote a book, and I was asking him, I'm like, listen, so Daniel Boone, Indians, all these hunters have been around generationally. They were just as smart as us, but these guys were woodsmen in the woods every day. They talk about all these Bigfoot traits. The Indians talk about them whistling and how they behave and all this other stuff. They never mention them doing things with, tree manipulation. So how does this person that lives in Charlotte, North Carolina, that's a CPA, that goes to the woods 3 weekends a year, say this is what Bigfoot's doing, but Simon Kenton, the frontiersman, never mentioned it.
Yeah.
I just don't see that as being reasonable. Now, that being said, if someone tells me something when I'm taking a report, I put it in my file, I take note of it, because who knows, something may came up later. But I mean, if you're going to present something that's going to require great proof, then, we need to hold that standard pretty high before we just make that jump that it's entering portals and, all this other stuff.
Yeah. The twisting of the trees,
Yeah.
I could believe that, because I don't know how many times I've been in Colorado elk hunting or deer hunting, and I've seen black bears pulling scrub oaks down to get the acorns,
Yeah.
and where they've twisted the stuff. So I mean, if you got an animal, if it's as big as everybody says it is, and if it's that strong, I could see where it could take a tree that and break and twist it. Moose can break trees. Moose are very powerful cervids.
Yeah, I mean, these people that are out in the woods, though, I mean, they'll send you pictures of damage that a pileated woodpecker did on the side of a tree. They'll send you a picture that, I mean, in Ohio, and I'm sure in Iowa, I mean, many times big bucks are rubbing telephone poles, electric poles.
Yeah, they are.
And, you'll see these pictures that are clearly animal buck rubs.
But they're not making pyramids and stuff.
No, they're not doing that. But I mean, come on. I mean,
Yeah.
you want me to believe that this animal has not been acknowledged in all these years, but it's putting up all these little pyramids and breaks about where it's going. It just doesn't seem reasonable at all.
Yeah, Rick says he loves the woo factor, laughing out loud. I'm in the woods a lot. He's a hunter too, Russ. I know Rick. He's a good guy. Tell him it's okay. I'm a kook. You're not a kook, Rick. Listen, everybody's got their own theory, and none of this is all hypotheses right now. I mean, Russ you're documenting a lot of stuff. Patty, I believe Patty, the Patty film Rod Giblum and who was the other gentleman?
Bob Gimlin and Robert.
Thank you. I feel bad now.
Roger
Patterson,
Patterson.
Patterson and Gilman. I believe
Yeah.
that's real. And
Yeah,
the
that was
reason
October in 1967.
I say that's real, they've spent millions of dollars in trying to debunk that.
Yeah, it looks silly too, doesn't it?
Huh?
Everything that they try to do to make to this is a film that it is the most iconic movie film in history. It's looked at more than any other film
Even
of any type.
JFK's assassination film.
Yeah, even more than that.
Yeah.
And Walt Disney looked at it at that time and just said, we can't reproduce it. This is a time that you're getting Planet of the Apes.
That's exactly what I was going to
after it.
say. You look at the costumes for Planet of the Apes, and then you look at that film. That film blows Planet of the Apes costumes
They
out.
didn't even show the apes like down below. It was just like
Right.
from chest
Right.
up because they couldn't
Right.
do it,
Right.
And then
Right.
on top of that, then you're going to give Patty boobs. I mean,
Yeah.
who's going to give this animal boobs? I mean, and aside from that, there's tracks from there. I mean, there's whole books written on it. I mean, it's funny that I think it's so interesting about people that have never been in the woods, never hunted, never have done anything in the woods. If you ask them, hey, do you believe in Bigfoot? They'll have an opinion. And I'm like, how do you have an opinion? I mean,
well,
like,
you can't turn the TV. You can't turn TV on without seeing something about it.
no. I mean, but in the country, around 30% believe in Bigfoot, and that's including Chicago, New York, Miami, all these LA, all these places. But in the Pacific Northwest and in Appalachia, it's over half of the people. And it's because in those areas, those people have a sense of how large the wilderness is, how deep the woods are, how hard it is to see a bear, how hard it is to get a picture of a bear. I mean, I tell people all the time, I carry a GoPro on a hiking stick. So whenever I've trained myself, whichever way I look, my camera rolls. Because I think I had an encounter a couple years ago and I was not using it then. And so I really believe that if you get about 4 seconds of fairly close, high quality video, that some people would be compelled. Not as many people as if a hunter puts one down.
Yeah, and I hope that doesn't happen, to be honest with you, because if it is what I think it is, if it is what I believe it is, I could never shoot one. I just
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to do it, and they're too close to us, And here's another thing. I'm not a conspiracy guy. I'm really not, but I don't think the government would let us know if someone shot one. I think they probably already have, and they've covered it up. To be honest, that's my take on it, because they would have to give them protected habitat status, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I mean, that would be an issue, right? I mean, I kind of have believed, and I debated this a lot over the years, and I believe that there's people in government that acknowledge that Bigfoot exists. And you hear it all the time. Literally dozens and dozens of rangers have came out after they retired and had sightings and say, yeah, they exist.
Action Jackson, like
yeah, Action Jackson, and there's guys in Minnesota, the guys in California, but I don't think that systemically there is like some type of plot that says, let's not let people know that Bigfoot exists. But listen, I'm not, when we had that disease that went around a couple of years ago, and I'm not going to say it because every time I say it, I always get flagged by YouTube and wherever else, and people get in trouble. But when that disease came around, it showed me for the first time that people aren't capable of handling something like Bigfoot existing. I'm telling you, the hunters that watch your show, that are interested and you're friends with, we would all still hunt. We would all be out there because we'd be saying, you know what, I've been here my whole life. I've been okay. I'm sure it's fine. But all the rest of the people, they would not go. They would be afraid to go in our state and national parks. They could not handle the thought that something like that was in the woods with them. And I think that the government certainly would be fearful of letting people know that.
I just don't think they'd want to lose the revenue from all the logging and everything. I think that that's part of it myself, but I don't know. I mean, the more I keep doing these shows, Russ, I keep hearing about people in military actions, and when Mount St. Helens erupted, that they found bodies, and the government came in and took them out, and you keep hearing all this stuff, and I mean, some of this has got to be. It can't all be made up, right?
No, I think some of them are legitimate conspiracy theories and they're just stories. And when we follow up, we have a hard time finding people to corroborate the stories that we're hearing.
Yeah.
But like I said, there's genuinely, I mean, there's all this evidence we have, some pictures, some footprint, some hair, and all this other stuff. And of course, there's a study going on right now at NC State. The first university produced government funded study on DNA. And so, we've been soliciting people all year for getting samples to North Carolina State. And, hopefully some of it's going to come out of it. In the past, it's left us frustrated. There's been, like there was this guy named Brian Sykes, a PhD from Oxford, and he's dead now. But a few years ago, he solicited samples, and a bunch of us sent samples in, and they only tested a few, and they threw away and burned the rest of them. It's freaking hard to get these samples. I
Yeah.
mean, it's hard. I'm the person that takes all these reports, and if someone calls me tomorrow, I'm leaving all my patients. My younger doctors can see them. I am going to wherever it happened instantly and going to be there. And I
Yeah.
have done that dozens of times to get the most fresh place. But even then, a couple times a year, I'll find a footprint or hear a noise that makes me suspicious. But I have walked hundreds and hundreds of miles in remote creeks that after they flood and they have all that silt and stuff, just watching for prints. And I'm telling you, much like mountain lions and monkeys, they're cognizant of leaving their prints around.
I was reading something the other day where they're saying like 6, 7, 800 years ago, there was an ape. I don't know where it was in the evolution chain, but they said that they actually buried their dead.
Yeah, so no one really knows, right? Because elephants cover their dead. Some of the apes will do the same thing. So, I mean, it's hard to know because you're just talking about a rare animal. I mean, it's in the most remote places. Maybe it's like an old dog that how we had the old dog on the farm and it got sick and it just kind of creep off somewhere and die, and
Never
nature
see
takes
'em.
it apart really quickly and nobody knows. I
Yeah.
mean, it could be something like that. I think the biggest issue across the board is the rarity of the animal, that people discount how rare something like that is. I mean, we have came at the number of 4,000 as the very bottom number based on, what it would take for there to be some type of reproduction.
Yeah. It's fascinating. I tell you, I love this. I knew I was going to enjoy this conversation because you're coming at it at a totally different angle than what I've had on other guests on before. And I've been trying to get Dr. Jeff on. I can't get him to email me back. I know he was sick there for a while.
Yeah, he was sick and he's had some issues.
Yeah, but I would just love to get him on for an hour to talk about footprints because to me, I think that's the most credible evidence that there is something running around out there. Because I mean, he's an anthropological. He's got a PhD or
Yeah.
in anthropology. I mean, he's an accredited scientist. I mean, he's not a crypto guy. He's an accredited scientist.
The reality is, Dan, the scientists that are living in this generation that we have now, it's evolved, it's changed. So we used to think just in the last couple decades that there was this long line, like we had a Neanderthal man and he got killed by this guy and evolved into this guy. Well, now we know it's not like that at all. There was just all these different types and they interbred and they killed each other. And that's what happened. But you have these doctors, these PhDs in these universities, and that's how they were raised. So now the younger generation of scientists, they're much more open to this, but we have to get these old ones to retire and die in these next 10 years. And we'll see science become more interested in it. Because right now the reality is, I mean, let's say I got something on a game camera, a really good video, a clear video, here's what bothers me. So I told you, I'm doing these cameras and something will disappear, my animals. And so I know something's in there stirring them up. But let's say I have a main hollow that's running like 6 or 8 miles and I'm driving to the middle of nowhere to get to this hollow and I'm hiking in there off trail and I'm a couple miles back in there and I put a camera up monitoring this hollow. I'm trying to do it where the creek's a little loud, so maybe it'll disguise that noise. And then maybe 100 yards away, there's a side hollow coming down that may run for a mile or two. So I could almost throw rocks and hit these cameras. Well, the one that's in the main hollow, I see 4 coyotes at the same time. I see a pack of turkeys. I see 4 big gobblers at the same time. There's all these different deer. The only people I see were a state surveying crew that came through one day. And other than that, there was no humans for 9 months. But then I go over and pull that other camera in that side hollow. So the month after I was there was not a deer in a flat with a creek running through it. Not
Yeah,
a deer.
that's
It's
crazy.
not possible.
Yeah.
Not possible. So I don't know what the answer is, how to go about it. I keep trying all these different things. I'm just a dude. I'm just one guy that has hunted my whole life as a woodsman that went to school for a long time, but it's still just me. And tomorrow I got to see patients. I can't be like in the woods tomorrow.
Yeah.
So, maybe we need a coal truck from West Virginia or Kentucky or Southern Ohio to hit one, or maybe one of these hunters is going to pull the trigger. And historically, there was 2 hunters that were for students at Ohio University in the 70s had shot one apparently in Idaho, and it was apparently rooting around on his all fours digging at something, and they thought it was an elk, and they shot it. When it got over there, it looked too human. They hit it in the spine and killed it, and so they buried it and swore each other to privacy. And years later, one of the guys died, and so the other one flew out there and went to the local sheriff. And then, I can barely find my cameras sometimes. If it's been a few months, so you can imagine, 30 years you go back and you're trying to find this, and they couldn't find anything. But there's stories like that around. But I'm going to tell you what I believe is that when Bigfoot is acknowledged, the public is going to be shocked at the amount of evidence that's going to come out all at once. People that have been holding cameras, people that have bones, people that have pictures, that they don't want to be called weird. They don't want to be called stupid.
They don't want to they don't want to be ridiculed. Yeah.
Yeah. That. It's weird because, like one time, I don't remember because I do so much stuff. It was maybe a radio show out of New Orleans or maybe Toronto. I don't really remember, but they had an anthropologist on that didn't believe in Bigfoot, and him and I were, going to debate it, but they still talk about the same thing that many of us, we got past many years ago, and they'd say, well, we don't know whether there's enough carrying capacity of the land that, food could support this. We already have dealt with all this. We already know they can. It's not an issue. He'd say, well, we don't have any evidence. We have a lot of evidence, but everybody's living their life. You're doing your TV shows. You got a wife, you got kids, you're doing all this stuff. You got to hunt 4 months out of the year. Bigfoot is a little bit on your mainframe, but you have to ask, what's going on in Bigfoot world or whatever it happens to be, because if it was like deer, you would say all this stuff's going on and blah, 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 blah. But, most people are living their life and they're not interested in Bigfoot beyond a TV show.
No, I get it. Hey, we got about a minute left, Dr. Jones. Tell them how they can get a hold of your stuff, your books, and all that other fun stuff.
TheBigfootDoc.com. You can find the link to the podcast there. I think I've done 70 shows so far. I release every Thursday with my good friend Brad Kennan, which is an engineer, and we talk about these things. And both my books are on there. And a lot of times people can just put in Dr. Jones Bigfoot, and there's all kinds of different interviews and podcasts and things I've done all over the country. And, and I am consumed with Bigfoot. I live my life. I feel sorry for the people in my life. It's a lot to deal with.
There you go. Dr. Russ, thank you. Thanks, everybody. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Unknown Files. We'll see you next time. Keep it here on the Outdoor Call Radio Network. And if you need anything, just message me and I'll get back to you. Great show tonight. We'll talk to you all soon. Good night, everybody.